The sun hadn't even risen yet when Amara's eyes opened. She didn't need an alarm clock anymore. Her body had learned to wake up on its own right before dawn every single day. For a moment, she lay there in the darkness, listening to the sound of her mother's labored breathing from the next room. That sound had become the soundtrack of her life over the past 6 months. She pushed herself up from the thin mattress and reached for her headscarf in the dim light. Her fingers moved automatically, tying it the way she'd done thousands of times before. The small mirror on the wall caught her reflection, and she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. When had those dark circles appeared under her eyes? When had her face become so thin? 28 years old! That's what the calendar said, but she felt like she'd lived 100 years in the last 6 months. From the other room, she heard a soft moan. Her mother was awake. Amara hurried to her bedside, her bare feet silent on the cool floor. The room smelled of medicine and sickness, no matter how many times she opened the windows or burned incense. "Mama, I'm here," she whispered, taking her mother's hot hand in hers. Zainab's eyes were half closed, and for a terrifying moment, she didn't seem to recognize her own daughter. Then something cleared in her gaze, and she squeezed Amara's hand weakly. "Water," she rasped. Amara's heart sank. The clay pot in the corner was almost empty. She'd have to make the journey to the well earlier than usual today. The well was 45 minutes away by foot, and she needed to make the trip 3 times a day just to keep them going. 3 trips. That was almost 5 hours of walking, not counting the time spent waiting in line with the other women, drawing the heavy buckets up from the deep earth. She helped her mother take small sips from what little water remained, then gently laid her back down. "I'll get more water now, Mama. I'll be quick." Her mother's eyes had already closed again. The fever made her drift in and out of consciousness like this, and each time it happened, Amara wondered if this would be the time she didn't wake up. She grabbed the large clay pot and the rope, slipping them into the faded cloth bag she carried on her shoulder. The sky was just beginning to lighten as she stepped out of their small house. Their home sat at the edge of the village, a blessing and a curse. It meant privacy, but it also meant she was farther from everything, including the well. The path was familiar under her feet. She'd walked it so many times she could probably do it with her eyes closed. Dust rose with each step, coating her worn sandals. In the distance, she could hear a rooster crowing, and somewhere a baby was crying. Normal sounds of the village waking up. Normal for everyone else anyway. Her mind drifted as she walked, the way it always did on these lonely journeys. She thought about her old life, the one that felt like it belonged to someone else now. Just 8 months ago, she'd been living in the city, teaching at a primary school. She'd had her own small apartment, friends who'd invite her out for tea on weekends, and a salary that let her send money home to her parents. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Her mother had collapsed. The local healer couldn't figure out what was wrong. The fever wouldn't break. Her father had died 3 years earlier, and her brothers had moved even farther away than the city, chasing jobs and opportunities. They sent money when they remembered, but that was all. Amara hadn't even thought twice. She'd quit her teaching job, packed her few belongings, and come home. Someone had to take care of Mama, and that someone was clearly going to be her. She'd thought it would be temporary, maybe a few weeks, a month at most. Get Mama to a doctor in the city, get her the right medicine, and everything would go back to normal. But nothing had gone according to plan. The local clinic had no answers. The one doctor who came through the village once a month had prescribed medicine that didn't work. Her savings had melted away like ice in the sun, spent on remedies and treatments that did nothing. Now here she was, 6 months later, and her mother was getting worse instead of better. The village elders had started talking. She could feel their eyes on her whenever she went to the market or walked through the village center. "Poor girl," they'd say, loud enough for her to hear. 28 and still unmarried. "She's waited too long. Who will marry her now?" As if marriage was supposed to be her biggest concern right now. As if she had time to think about anything except keeping her mother alive and putting food on their table. The well came into view as she crested the small hill. Thank God no one else was there yet. She'd have the place to herself for a few precious minutes. The stone wall around the well was old, built by ancestors she'd never met. Deep grooves had been worn into the stone where thousands of ropes had rubbed against it over the years. She set down her pot and prepared the rope, tying it securely to the bucket. This was the 3rd bucket they'd gone through this year. The ropes always frayed eventually from the constant friction and weight. She'd checked this one just yesterday and it had seemed fine, but you could never be too careful. The bucket hit the water far below with a distant splash. She began pulling it up, hand over hand, feeling the familiar burn in her shoulders and arms. This was the hardest part, the pulling. The bucket full of water was so heavy that sometimes she thought her arms would simply give up and refuse to work. She was almost halfway up when she heard footsteps behind her. Another woman from the village, probably. She didn't turn around, just kept pulling. Pull, wrap the rope, pull again. Her hands were covered in calluses now, rough and hard where they used to be soft. Finally, the bucket appeared at the top of the well. She grabbed it carefully and began pouring the water into her clay pot, cool and clear. At least the water here was good, even if everything else in her life was falling apart. She was preparing to lower the bucket again when a sound made her stop. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, the way she'd looked this morning. So weak, so confused. The medicine was almost gone and she had no money to buy more. The clinic kept telling her to take Mama to the city hospital, but how? The city was hours away, and the hospital there would cost more money than she'd see in a year. Before she could stop them, tears started running down her face. She tried to wipe them away quickly, embarrassed, but they just kept coming. Her shoulders started shaking and then she was sobbing, right there by the well where anyone could see her. This was it. This was the moment when she finally broke. She'd been so strong for so long, but she had nothing left. No money. No help, no hope. She was going to lose her mother and there was nothing she could do about it. She sank down next to the stone wall, not even caring that she was getting her clothes dirty. Let the whole village see her crying. What did it matter anymore? Her mother was dying, and she was completely, utterly alone. The sun was fully up now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It would have been beautiful if she'd been able to see it through her tears. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the village coming to life. Normal people doing normal things, living normal lives. And here she was, 28 years old, sitting by a well, crying because she couldn't save the person she loved most in the world. She didn't know how long she sat there. Time seemed to stop meaning anything. All she knew was pain and fear and exhaustion so deep it felt like it went all the way to her bones. She barely noticed when someone sat down beside her on the dusty ground. Amara didn't look up right away. She couldn't. Her face was wet with tears and she was embarrassed enough without having to face whoever had decided to witness her breakdown. She just sat there, hoping whoever it was would say something pitying and then leave her alone. But the person next to her didn't say anything. They just sat there in silence, so close that Amara could sense their presence, but not close enough to be intrusive. It was strange, this quiet companionship. Most people in the village would have immediately started asking questions or offering useless advice. After what felt like forever, Amara finally wiped her face with the edge of her headscarf and turned to look at who was sitting beside her. It was a woman she'd never seen before. That alone was unusual. In a village this small, everyone knew everyone else. Strangers were rare and usually caused quite a stir. The woman looked to be in her 50s, maybe a bit older. Her clothes were simple but made from good fabric, the kind you didn't find in their local market. Her headscarf was neatly tied and her face had a kind quality to it, with gentle lines around her eyes and mouth. She wasn't looking at Amara. Instead, she was gazing out at the horizon as if giving Amara privacy even while sitting right next to her. "I'm sorry," Amara said, her voice rough from crying. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." The woman turned to her then and her eyes were warm. "You haven't disturbed me at all. Sometimes the weight gets too heavy to carry alone." There was something about the way she said it that made Amara's eyes fill with tears again. This woman didn't know her, didn't know anything about her situation, but somehow she understood. Amara started, then stopped. What could she say? Where would she even begin? The woman waited, not pushing, just present. And somehow that patience unlocked something in Amara. The words started tumbling out like water from a broken dam. She told this stranger everything. About her mother's mysterious illness that no one could diagnose. About quitting her job in the city to come home and care for her. About watching her savings disappear while her mother only got sicker. About her brothers who were too far away or too busy to help. About the medicine that wasn't working and the hospital in the city that she couldn't afford. She even told her about the small, shameful fears she'd never said out loud to anyone. The fear that she'd given up her whole life for nothing. The fear that her mother would die anyway and she'd be left with nothing and no one. The guilt she felt for sometimes resenting the situation, for missing her old life, for being tired of being strong. The woman listened to all of it without interrupting. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell Amara that everything would be fine. She just listened, really listened in a way that made Amara feel like maybe she wasn't completely alone after all. When Amara finally ran out of words, they sat in silence again. The sun was climbing higher now, and Amara realized she needed to get the water home to her mother. She reached for the bucket, preparing to lower it into the well again. That's when it happened. She'd been pulling up buckets of water 3 times a day for 6 months. She knew how to tie the rope. She knew how to check it for weak spots. But sometimes things just break at the worst possible moment. The rope snapped. The bucket plummeted back down into the well with a distant splash that sounded like the final note of her hope dying. Amara stared down into the darkness of the well, watching the rope end dangling uselessly. The bucket was gone, sunk to the bottom where she couldn't reach it. It was such a small thing. Just a bucket, just a rope. But it was the last straw. She felt her legs give out and she found herself back on the ground next to the stone wall. She didn't cry this time. She was beyond crying. She just sat there empty and defeated. "That was my only bucket," she heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, flat. "I don't have money for another one." Without a bucket, she couldn't get water. Without water, she couldn't care for her mother or cook food or clean. It was over. Everything was just over. The woman stood up and looked down into the well, then sat back down beside Amara. She pulled a cloth bag from her shoulder, the kind city women carried, and took out a bottle of water. She opened it and handed it to Amara. "Drink," she said gently. Amara took the bottle automatically and drank. The water was cool and clean, and she realized how thirsty she was. She'd been so focused on getting water for her mother that she'd forgotten to drink enough herself. "What's your name?" the woman asked. "Amara." "I'm HOA," the woman said. "I'm a doctor." "Well, I was a doctor. I'm retired now, a doctor, of course." That explained the good clothes and the educated way she spoke. But what was a retired doctor doing at a village well at dawn? As if reading her mind, HOA explained, "I'm visiting the area to study water quality. I'm from a village not far from here, though I lived in the city for most of my life. When I retired, I decided to come back to my roots and try to help with health initiatives in rural areas." Amara nodded, not really caring why this woman was there. What did it matter? But then HOA said something that made Amara's heart skip a beat. "Tell me more about your mother's symptoms, all of them in as much detail as you can remember." So Amara did. She described the fever that came and went but never really left. The way her mother's joints had started swelling and hurting. The breathing difficulties that had gotten worse over the past few weeks. The confusion that came and went, making her mother sometimes forget where she was or who Amara was. HOA asked specific questions. How long had each symptom been going on? Had her mother had any infections before this started? What medicines had been tried? What did the local doctor say? With each question, Amara watched HOA's expression grow more thoughtful. The older woman wasn't just making conversation. She was actually thinking about this like a real doctor, putting pieces together in her mind. Finally, HOA leaned back against the stone wall and looked at Amara seriously. "I think I might know what's wrong with your mother." The world seemed to stop spinning. Amara couldn't breathe. "What?" "I can't be completely sure without examining her properly," HOA said carefully. "But based on what you've described, it sounds like it could be rheumatic heart disease. It's often triggered by an infection that doesn't get treated properly. The infection seems to go away, but it damages the heart and joints. It gets worse over time if it's not treated correctly." "Can it be treated?" Amara's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes," HOA said. "With the right medicines and care, many people improve significantly. It's serious, but it's not hopeless, not hopeless." Those 2 words felt like a miracle. "But I don't have money for medicine," Amara said, the brief flash of hope dimming. "I've already spent everything I had." HOA was quiet for a moment, looking at Amara with an expression that was hard to read. Finally, she said, "Would you let me come see your mother? I'd like to examine her myself. If I'm right about what's wrong, I have some connections that might help." Amara wanted to say yes immediately, but years of village life had taught her to be cautious. "Why would you help us? You don't know us." It was a fair question, and HOA seemed to respect it. She looked away, out at the horizon again, and when she spoke, her voice was softer. "I had a daughter once. She would have been about your age now. She paused, and Amara could see pain flicker across her face. She died 5 years ago. An accident. I'm so sorry, Amara whispered. Hawa nodded, accepting the sympathy. She was a lot like you. She had that same fierce love for her family. That same willingness to sacrifice everything for the people she cared about. When I look at you, I see echoes of her. She turned back to Amara. I'm not trying to replace her. I know I can't do that. But maybe I can honor her memory by helping someone who reminds me of the best parts of who she was. Amara felt tears coming again. But these were different. These weren't tears of despair. I finish my water quality work here in about an hour, Hawa said. If you give me directions to your home, I can come by this afternoon. I'll bring my old medical bag. Let me examine your mother and we'll see what we can do. Amara found herself nodding. Maybe it was foolish to trust a stranger. Maybe she'd be disappointed again. But what choice did she have? This was the first real hope she'd had in 6 months. She gave Hawa directions to their house. It wasn't hard to explain. Everyone knew the small house at the edge of the village, the one where the sick woman and her unmarried daughter lived. One more thing, Hawa said, standing up and brushing dust from her clothes. She reached into her bag and pulled out a rope and a metal bucket. I brought extras for my work. Please take these. Amara looked at the bucket and rope, then up at Hawa's kind face. I can't just take your things. You're not taking them. I'm giving them to you. There's a difference. Hawa pressed them into Amara's hands. Now you can get water for your mother. And this afternoon we'll see what else we can do. Before Amara could figure out what to say, Hawa had shouldered her bag and was walking away, back toward the village. Amara watched her go. This stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and offered hope when she'd had none left. She looked down at the bucket and rope in her hands, solid and real. Then she looked up at the sky, which seemed a little brighter than it had an hour ago. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Amara rushed home with the water, her mind spinning. Part of her wondered if she'd imagined the whole thing. A doctor appearing at the well exactly when she needed help most? It seemed too good to be true. But the bucket in her hands was real and the rope was new and strong, not like the frayed one she'd been using. When she got home, her mother was still sleeping. Amara gently touched her forehead. Still burning with fever, she dampened a cloth with the fresh water and placed it on her mother's head, the way she'd done hundreds of times before. Mama, she whispered, a doctor is coming to see you today. A real doctor. Her mother didn't respond, lost in whatever fevered dreams haunted her. Amara spent the next few hours cleaning the house, trying to make it presentable. Their home was simple and small, but it was clean. She wanted this doctor to see that they were poor. Yes, but they weren't without dignity. She'd just finished sweeping when she heard footsteps outside. Her heart jumped into her throat. She smoothed down her clothes and went to the door. Hawa stood there, carrying a worn leather bag that must have been her medical kit. In the full light of day, Amara could see her more clearly. There was something professional about her, the way she carried herself. This was a woman who'd spent her life helping people. Thank you for coming, Amara said, stepping aside to let her in. Hawa entered and looked around the small space without judgment. Where is your mother? Amara led her to the back room where Zainab lay. The older woman's breathing was shallow and labored. Hawa set down her bag and pulled up a small stool next to the bed. Hello, Mama Zainab, she said softly, even though the sick woman's eyes were closed. My name is Dr. Hawa. I'm here to help you if I can. What followed was the most thorough examination Amara had ever seen. Hawa listened to her mother's chest with an old stethoscope, felt her swollen joints carefully, checked her pulse, looked at her eyes and tongue. She asked Amara dozens of questions about when each symptom had started, what medicines had been tried, how her mother's condition had changed over time. The whole time, Hawa's face remained calm and professional, giving nothing away. Amara stood in the corner, her hands clasped tightly together, barely breathing. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Hawa packed up her stethoscope and turned to Amara. Let's talk outside. Let your mother rest. They sat on the small bench outside the house under the shade of the only tree in the yard. Hawa's expression was serious and Amara braced herself for bad news. I was right, Hawa said. Your mother has rheumatic heart disease. The infection that caused it probably happened months before she got really sick. Maybe she had a bad sore throat or fever that seemed to get better on its own. Amara thought back. Yes, about 8 or 9 months ago. She was sick for a week, but then she seemed fine. She said it was just a cold. Hawa nodded. That's typical. The initial infection seems to go away, but if it's not treated with the right antibiotics, it can trigger this condition. The body's immune system starts attacking its own tissues, especially the heart and joints. That's why she has the fever, the joint pain, and the breathing problems. Is she going to die? Amara asked bluntly. She needed to know the truth. Hawa met her eyes. Not if we act now. The condition is serious, but with proper treatment she can improve. She'll need specific medications to reduce the inflammation and protect her heart. She'll need to take them regularly for months, maybe longer. But I've seen many patients recover and live full lives with proper care. Hope and fear warred in Amara's chest. The medicine must be expensive. It is, Hawa admitted. But I have some ideas about that. First, though, your mother needs to be properly evaluated at a hospital. I can diagnose what's wrong, but she needs tests to confirm it and to see how much damage has been done to her heart. Amara's hope deflated. The hospital in the city is too far and too expensive. The local clinic already told me they can't help. I know, Hawa said, but I used to work at the teaching hospital in the city. I still have connections there. Let me make some phone calls. She pulled out a mobile phone, something Amara hadn't owned in months. She'd sold hers to buy medicine that hadn't worked. Hawa walked a little away, speaking in low tones. Amara couldn't hear what she was saying, but she watched anxiously, trying to read the older woman's body language. After several calls, Hawa came back. I've arranged for your mother to be admitted to the teaching hospital where I used to work. They have a program for patients who can't afford treatment. It's not free, but it's much cheaper than normal, and I've called in a favor with a colleague who specializes in rheumatic diseases. He'll oversee her care personally. Amara couldn't speak. She just stared at this woman who was for some reason moving mountains for a stranger. There's more, Hawa continued. I contacted a pharmaceutical company that has a program providing medications to patients in need. If your mother qualifies, and I think she will, they'll supply her medicines at no cost for the first year. Why are you doing this? The question burst out of Amara. You don't know us. We can't pay you back. Hawa was quiet for a long moment. She looked down at her hands, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I told you I had a daughter. Her name was Layla. She was studying to be a teacher like you were. She was engaged to be married. She had her whole life ahead of her. Amara waited, sensing there was more. She died in a car accident 5 years ago. She was coming home to visit me and a drunk driver hit her car. Hawa's eyes were wet now. I was a doctor for 40 years. I saved so many lives, but I couldn't save hers. I wasn't even there. I'm so sorry, Amara whispered. After she died, I threw myself into work. I tried to save everyone, as if saving enough other people could make up for not being able to save her. But it didn't help. Eventually, I burned out. I had to retire. Hawa looked up at the sky. For the past year, I've been lost. I didn't know what to do with myself anymore. I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't a mother. I was just empty. She turned to Amara. Then this morning I saw you at the well, crying because you're trying so hard to save your mother and you feel like you're failing. You gave up everything to come home and care for her. You're exhausted and broken alone, but you're still fighting. Her voice broke. You reminded me so much of Layla. She would have done the same thing. She had that same fierce love. Tears were streaming down both their faces now. I'm not trying to replace my daughter, Hawa said. I know I can't do that and I'm not trying to. But maybe I can honor her memory by helping someone who has the same beautiful spirit she had. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do with whatever time I have left. Maybe that's how I heal. Amara found herself reaching out and taking the older woman's hand. Thank you, she said. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for caring. They sat there for a while. Two women who'd been strangers that morning, now connected by grief and hope and the possibility of healing. Eventually, Hawa wiped her eyes and became professional again. Here's what needs to happen. We need to get your mother to the hospital as soon as possible. Tomorrow, if we can manage it. I'll arrange for an ambulance to come pick her up. You'll go with her, of course. The hospital will keep her for at least a week, maybe 2, while they run tests and start her treatment. I'll need to pack, Amara said, her mind already racing. And I need to tell my brothers, though I don't know if they'll come. Call them, Hawa said firmly. They need to know their mother is seriously ill. Whether they come or not is their choice, but they deserve to know. Over the next hour, they made plans. Hawa wrote down a list of things Amara should pack for the hospital. She explained what tests would probably be done and what treatments might be started. She answered every question Amara had, patient and thorough. Before she left, Hawa reached into her bag and pulled out some money. "This is for food and necessities while you're at the hospital. Don't argue with me. You'll need to eat, and hospital food is terrible." Amara tried to refuse, but Hawa insisted. "You're going to need your strength to care for your mother. Let me help." After Hawa left, promising to return early the next morning, Amara went back inside to sit with her mother. Zainab was awake now, her eyes more clear than they'd been in days. "Who was that?" she asked weakly. "A doctor, Mama. A good doctor. She says she can help you get better." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "I heard you talking. She lost her daughter?" "Yes, Mama." "Then we're blessed," Zainab whispered. "Sometimes God sends angels to us when we need them most. But sometimes we're the blessing for them too. That woman needs to help us as much as we need her help." Amara hadn't thought of it that way, but her mother was right. Hawa wasn't just saving them. In a way, they were saving her too, giving her purpose again, giving her a way to honor her daughter's memory. That evening, Amara called her brothers. Their reactions were mixed. One promised to try to visit. The other said he'd send money but couldn't leave his job. It was what she'd expected, but it still hurt. She spent the night packing what little they had and sitting with her mother, telling her about the hospital and the treatment that was coming. For the first time in 6 months, Zainab seemed hopeful. "You should have left me and gone back to your life in the city," her mother said at one point. "Never," Amara replied firmly. "You're my mother. Where else would I be?" As she lay down to sleep that night, Amara thought about how strange life was. This morning she'd been at her lowest point, broken and hopeless. Now, because a stranger had decided to sit down next to her at a well, everything had changed. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if her mother would fully recover. But for the first time in a long time, she had something she'd almost forgotten existed. She had hope. The ambulance came early the next morning, just as Hawa had promised. Amara had barely slept, too nervous and excited about what was to come. She'd packed and repacked their small bag 3 times, making sure she had everything her mother might need. Hawa arrived before the ambulance, carrying a basket of food. "For the journey," she explained. "It's a long drive to the city." The village had gathered to watch, of course. News traveled fast in small places. Neighbors whispered and pointed as the ambulance pulled up, its white paint dusty from the dirt roads. Some looked sympathetic. Others just looked curious. A few of the older women clucked their tongues, probably making comments about city doctors and newfangled ideas. Amara didn't care what they thought. All she cared about was getting her mother help. The ambulance workers were efficient and kind. They loaded Zainab onto a stretcher gently, and Amara climbed in beside her. Hawa got in too, saying she'd go with them to help with the admission process. As the ambulance pulled away, Amara looked back at their small house, wondering when she'd see it again. Then she turned her attention to her mother, who looked small and fragile under the white sheet. The drive took 3 hours. Zainab slept most of the way, exhausted from just being moved. Hawa sat across from them, watching the monitors that tracked Zainab's heart rate and breathing. Occasionally, she'd lean over to adjust something or make a note on a pad of paper she'd brought. Amara had never been to a big hospital before. When they arrived, she was overwhelmed by the size of it, the noise, the crowds of people. Everything moved so fast, but Hawa navigated it all like she'd never left. She spoke to people in medical terms Amara didn't understand, showed identification cards and signed papers. Within an hour, Zainab was settled in a room. It wasn't private, but it was clean and bright, with a real hospital bed and machines that beeped softly. 2 other patients shared the room, but they were separated by curtains that gave some privacy. A young doctor came in soon after, the colleague Hawa had mentioned. His name was Dr. Yusuf, and he had a kind smile that reminded Amara of her father. He examined Zainab thoroughly, asking many of the same questions Hawa had asked. "Dr. Hawa's diagnosis appears correct," he told them, "but we'll run some tests to confirm and to see how much the heart has been affected. We'll do an echocardiogram, some blood work, and a chest x-ray. We should have results by tomorrow afternoon." The tests were done that day. Amara stayed by her mother's side through all of it, holding her hand when she looked scared. Hawa came and went, checking on them but also giving them space. She'd arranged for Amara to stay in a small room near the hospital, a place where families could sleep while their loved ones were being treated. That first night, lying in a strange bed in a strange room, Amara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what the tests might show. What if her mother's heart was too damaged? What if it was too late? But when Dr. Yusuf came the next afternoon with results, his face was cautiously optimistic. The damage is significant, he explained, showing them images that looked like nothing Amara could understand. But it's not beyond hope. We're going to start her on a combination of medications, some to reduce the inflammation, some to help her heart work better, and antibiotics to make sure there's no lingering infection. Will she get better? Amara asked. If she responds well to the medication, yes. It will take time. Months, probably. And she'll need to stay on some of these medicines for a long time, maybe forever. But I've seen patients with worse damage than this go on to live normal lives. He smiled at Zainab. You're a fighter, Mama, I can tell. The first week in the hospital was hard. Zainab's body had to adjust to the new medications, and there were side effects: nausea, dizziness, weakness. But slowly, Amara started to see small improvements. The fever began to break. Her mother's breathing became easier. The confusion cleared from her eyes and didn't come back. Hawa visited every day, sometimes twice a day. She brought food because, as she'd warned, the hospital food was terrible. She brought books to help Amara pass the time. She sat with Zainab when Amara needed to step out for fresh air. But she also did something unexpected. She started talking to Amara about her future. It happened one afternoon when Zainab was sleeping peacefully, the best sleep she'd had in months. Hawa had brought tea and they sat in the small family waiting room down the hall. What did you study to become a teacher? Hawa asked. Education, Amara replied. At the college in the city. It was a 2-year program. Did you enjoy it? Amara thought about it. It was fine. I liked the children. But honestly, I became a teacher because it was practical. The program was affordable and I knew I could get a job afterward. What would you have studied if money wasn't an issue? Hawa pressed. No one had ever asked Amara that question before. Nursing, she said quietly. I always thought about nursing. But the program was longer and more expensive, and my family needed me to start working. Hawa's eyes lit up. I thought so. I've watched you with your mother. You have natural caregiving instincts. You notice things, anticipate needs. That's not something you can teach. People either have it or they don't. Amara shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I just do what needs to be done. That's exactly what makes a good nurse, Hawa said. Listen, I have an idea. Don't say no right away. Just think about it. She explained that the teaching hospital had a scholarship program. It was designed for mature students, people who'd shown exceptional dedication to caring for others. The scholarship would cover tuition and some living expenses. In return, recipients had to promise to work in underserved areas for a few years after graduation. You would be perfect for this program, Hawa said. I already spoke to the director of nursing. I showed her your mother's case, told her how you'd given up everything to care for her. She's interested in meeting you. Amara's heart raced. But I can't, my mother still needs care. Even if she gets better, she can't live alone. I've thought about that, Hawa said carefully. What if we found a solution where your mother could be near you while you study? I'm planning to rent a small house here in the city. I've realized I want to be closer to the hospital, to stay involved in medicine in some way. Your mother could live with me. I'd enjoy the company and she'd have someone watching over her. You could visit as often as your studies allow. It was too much, too generous. Why would you do all this? Amara asked for what felt like the 100th time. Hawa reached across and took her hand. Because you remind me that there's still good in the world. Because helping you helps me heal. Because my daughter would have wanted me to do this. She paused. And because I believe in you. I see something special in you, Amara. You have the gift of caring combined with the strength to keep going even when things are impossibly hard. The world needs more nurses like you could be. Tears rolled down Amara's cheeks. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Say you'll meet with the nursing director. Say you'll give yourself permission to dream again. That night, Amara sat by her mother's bed and told her everything Hawa had proposed. She expected her mother to tell her it was too much to accept, that they couldn't be a burden on this kind woman. But Zainab surprised her. You should do it, she said firmly, her voice stronger than it had been in months. This is your chance, my daughter. Don't throw it away because of me. But Mama, no buts, Zainab interrupted. I've watched you sacrifice your dreams for me. It breaks my heart. If this woman is offering you a chance to have a future, you take it. Promise me. Only if you promise to keep fighting to get better, Amara countered. Deal, her mother said, and they clasped hands. 2 days later, Amara met with the nursing director, a stern-looking woman who turned out to have a warm heart. They talked for over an hour about Amara's experiences, her motivations, her dreams. At the end, the director smiled. Dr. HOA was right about you. I'd be honored to have you in our program. You can start with the next intake 3 months from now. That gives you time to get your mother settled and prepare yourself. 3 months. It seemed both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. Zainab stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks. By the time she was discharged, the change in her was remarkable. The fever was gone completely. The swelling in her joints had reduced. She could breathe normally again. She was still weak, and she'd need to continue the medications, but she looked like herself again. HOA had been busy during those 2 weeks. She'd rented a small house on the outskirts of the city, close enough to the hospital but affordable. It had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a yard with flowers. She'd even hired a part-time helper, a widow from her home village who needed work and could stay with Zainab during the day while Amara was at school. The day they moved Zainab into the house, Amara felt overwhelmed by gratitude. How had her life changed so completely in just 2 weeks? She'd gone from hopeless and alone to surrounded by support and opportunity. That evening, after Zainab was settled and sleeping peacefully in her new bed, HOA and Amara sat in the small living room drinking tea. I have one condition, HOA said. Here it was, Amara thought. The catch. You have to promise me that one day when you're a successful nurse, you'll do this for someone else. You'll see someone struggling, someone on the edge of giving up, and you'll reach out to them. You'll be the stranger who appears at exactly the right moment. Can you promise me that? Amara's throat was tight with emotion. I promise. I'll pay it forward, I swear. Good, HOA said, satisfied. That's how we change the world. One act of kindness at a time, one person helping another, creating a chain of compassion that never breaks. Before Amara went back to the village to pack up their house and prepare for this new chapter, she made one more trip to the well. The same well where, just 2 weeks ago, she'd been at her lowest point. She stood there looking at the stone wall, remembering how she'd sat there crying, certain that all was lost. If someone had told her then that a stranger would appear and change everything, she wouldn't have believed them. But it had happened. Sometimes when you're at the end of your rope, when you've given up all hope, that's exactly when help arrives. Not always in the way you expect. Not always from the people you think. But it arrives. She filled her bucket, HOA's bucket, with fresh water. As she pulled it up, she thought about the journey ahead. School would be hard. Balancing her studies with caring for her mother would be challenging. But for the first time in a long time, she was excited about the future instead of afraid of it. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. In 3 months, she'd start nursing school. In a few years, she'd graduate and begin her career, and someday she'd keep her promise to HOA. She'd be the stranger who appeared at someone's well, offering hope when they had none left. She was ready. 3 years had passed since that morning at the well. 3 years since HOA had sat down beside a crying, desperate woman and changed 2 lives forever. Amara stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, adjusting her white nursing uniform one last time. Today was her graduation day. In a few hours, she'd walk across that stage and receive her nursing degree. She'd made it. Despite the long hours of studying, the exhausting clinical rotations, the times she'd doubted herself, she'd actually made it. Her mother was already at the ceremony venue with HOA. Zainab was doing well, better than anyone had hoped 3 years ago. She still took her medications daily, still had to be careful not to overexert herself, but she was alive and thriving. She volunteered at a community health center twice a week, teaching new mothers about childcare. She'd found purpose again, just like her daughter had. And HOA, she'd become the mother Amara never knew she needed. Not replacing her own mother, but adding to the family in a way that felt natural and right. The 3 of them had dinner together every Sunday. HOA had become grandmother HOA to the neighborhood children, always ready with a kind word or a bandage for scraped knees. The ceremony was beautiful. When Amara's name was called, she heard her mother's loud cheer from the audience. followed by HOA's dignified applause. Both of her brothers had even come flying in for the occasion. It meant more than she could say. After the ceremony, as family and friends gathered for photos and celebrations, HOA pulled Amara aside. She had tears in her eyes. "Layla would have been so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you," Amara said, hugging the older woman tight. "Yes, you could have," HOA replied. "You always had this strength in you. I just helped you see it." The next week, Amara started her first job as a registered nurse at the same teaching hospital where her mother had been treated. It felt like coming full circle. She'd been assigned to the emergency department, one of the most challenging placements for a new nurse, but she was ready. The work was intense. The emergency department was always busy, always unpredictable. She saw everything from minor injuries to life-threatening emergencies. She learned to stay calm under pressure, to make quick decisions, to comfort frightened patients while providing expert care. But she also saw something else. She saw the scared family members in the waiting room. She saw the mothers holding sick children, trying to be brave. She saw the elderly patients who had no one to advocate for them. She saw the desperate, the poor, the overwhelmed. She saw herself 3 years ago, 6 months into her job. On a particularly busy Tuesday afternoon, a young woman was brought into the emergency department. She'd collapsed at the market. The paramedics said she'd been conscious but extremely weak and malnourished. Amara took her case. The woman's name was Fatima, and she was 25 years old. As Amara examined her and took her history, a familiar story emerged. Fatima had a 3-year-old son with a chronic illness. She'd spent all her money on his treatments. She wasn't eating properly because she was making sure her son had food. She'd lost her job because she couldn't be reliable when her son needed constant care. She was alone, exhausted, and at the end of her rope. Amara saw herself in this young woman's eyes. That same desperate look, that same bone-deep exhaustion, that same love that made you sacrifice everything. She provided the immediate medical care Fatima needed: an IV for dehydration, medication for her dangerously low blood pressure, food because she was clearly starving. But Amara knew that wasn't enough. Medical care alone wouldn't fix the problem. Over the next few days, as Fatima recovered in the hospital, Amara did more than just nursing. She contacted the hospital's social services department. She filled out applications for government assistance programs that Fatima didn't know existed. She connected Fatima with a community organization that helped single mothers. She even arranged for Fatima's son to be evaluated by a pediatric specialist who might be able to better manage his condition. HOA came to visit one evening and found Amara filling out paperwork at the nurse's station long after. Her shift should have ended. Working late? HOA asked with a knowing smile. "There's this patient," Amara explained. "She reminds me of me. I can't just treat her and send her back to the same impossible situation. I have to help her really get better." HOA's eyes were warm. "You're remembering your promise." "Every day," Amara replied. But Fatima wasn't the only one. There was the elderly man whose family had abandoned him. Amara spent her lunch breaks helping him apply for a spot in a subsidized care facility. There was the teenager who'd been in an accident and couldn't afford physical therapy. Amara connected him with a clinic that offered services on a sliding scale. Word spread. The other nurses started coming to Amara when they had patients with complex social needs. "Amara will know what to do," they'd say. "Amara knows all the programs and resources." One evening, about a year after she'd started working, Amara was at the hospital's small cafeteria grabbing dinner between shifts. She sat at an empty table, exhausted but satisfied. It had been a good day. She'd helped a lot of people. A young woman approached her table hesitantly. She wore a medical student's white coat and looked nervous. "Excuse me, are you Nurse Amara?" "Yes," Amara said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Please sit down." The student sat, twisting her hands together. "I'm sorry to bother you. It's just, I've been watching you work. The way you care for patients, not just their medical needs, but everything else. The way you see them as whole people, not just cases." She took a deep breath. "I'm struggling. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but I'm not sure anymore. I feel lost. I don't know if I'm good enough, if I'm making the right choice." Amara looked at this young woman and saw someone standing at a crossroads needing guidance. She thought about HOA, appearing at exactly the right moment with exactly the right words. "Tell me about it," Amara said gently. "Start from the beginning." They talked for over an hour. Amara shared her own story, her own struggles and doubts. She talked about how she'd found her calling, not in spite of her difficult experiences, but because of them. She encouraged the student to see her compassion as a strength, not a weakness. When they finally parted, the student's eyes were brighter. "Thank you," she said. "I feel like I can breathe again. Like maybe I'm not alone in feeling this way." "You're never alone," Amara told her. "There's always someone who's been where you are, who understands. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to ask for help." Walking home that night, Amara thought about the chain of kindness HOA had talked about. HOA had helped her. Now she was helping others. That medical student would probably go on to help someone else someday. On and on the chain would go, spreading compassion like ripples on water. The next Sunday at their weekly dinner, Amara told her mother and HOA about the medical student and about Fatima and the other patients she'd been helping. "I've been thinking," she said, "about starting something more organized. Maybe a program at the hospital specifically for patients who need more than just medical care. A program that connects them with resources, helps them navigate the system, advocates for them." HOA's face lit up. "That's a wonderful idea. Have you talked to the hospital administration about it?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first, to see what you thought." Her mother reached across and squeezed her hand. "I think you're doing exactly what you're meant to do. I think you're changing lives." "We all are," Amara said, looking at both of them. "Mama, you with your work at the health center. HOA, you with all the young medical professionals you mentor. Me with my patients. We're all part of that chain you talked about, HOA. The chain that never breaks." Over the next year, with HOA's guidance and support, Amara developed her proposal for the patient advocacy program. She presented it to the hospital board, her hands shaking but her voice steady. They approved it. They even gave her a small budget and the authority to hire an assistant. The program started small, but it grew. Other hospitals heard about it and wanted to create similar programs. Amara found herself giving presentations, training other nurses, spreading the model. But she never forgot where it all started. Every few months, she made the long journey back to her village. She'd visit the well, that place where her life had changed forever. She'd sit by the stone wall and remember the woman she'd been, broken and hopeless. On one of these visits, she noticed a young woman at the well, struggling with a heavy bucket, tears streaming down her face. Amara recognized that look, that posture of defeat, that exhaustion that went soul deep. She walked over and sat down beside the young woman without saying anything. Just present, just there, the way HOA had been for her. After a few minutes, the young woman looked at her. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "I'm just having a hard day." "Tell me about it," Amara said gently. "Sometimes the weight gets too heavy to carry alone." And so the young woman told her story. A sick father, lost job, no money for medicine, feeling alone and helpless. It was a